Of course, there are barriers to developing a community. One of the theories you might think about for any type of community or team being developed is the evolution. Here's probably one of the classic models of community formation, the idea that we go through these stages of development: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Without getting into the details of the whole model, just focus on this one area of storming. You can see the emotions: frustration, fear, defensiveness, and distrust. Wow, what are we doing here? I'm not feeling comfortable. I don't know what my role is. All of that. Inevitably, that leads to this area where we could have, in fact, some conflict. And you can imagine the difficulty we have with conflict when we're meeting face to face. It's even more daunting, perhaps, when we're separated physically and are not in the same space. So, in fact, a lot of teams and communities never develop because they hit this wall of storming. And they say, I just want to avoid the conflict. I just don't want to deal with it, taking a lot of energy, a lot of time. So, I tell you what, why don't we, ultimately, what we're saying is, why don't we not be a team? Why don't we forget really forging, becoming a strong community, and just divide up the work and go forward? So this is encountered not just in education, but in a lot of situations where we're trying to do work cooperatively, collaboratively, online. We never really get to the full aspects of being a community because it does take a certain amount of work. Thinking about this idea of having a conflict, you can imagine it is difficult, but if we can deal with the conflict, and if we can resolve effectively the differences, then we can actually use the conflict to lead to a deeper sense of community. You can think about the things that you do as an instructor, in a face-to-face environment. You might mediate, you might remind people of the rules of behavior, things like that. And it's tricky in the online space because we're not physically there. We're often not even there at the same time, synchronously. So there is this barrier to having an effective conflict, and we have to find ways of bridging that gap. Maybe one of the ways is to bring on another idea. This comes from Pat Lencioni in The Five Dysfunctions of Teams. You'll notice that at the fundamental level, this idea of trust. How do we, if we're going to build a community, we have to have a certain level of trust. You notice one of the things that they said: spend time in face to face. Well, clearly we may not have that in our online environment, but it does indicate maybe the usefulness of having some sort of synchronous communication tool available to us, and how that might help us. Certainly, some things, just as we did in this class, is really provide time for us to do our introductions. Now, that's not fully, a substitute for face-to-face interaction, but it does get us saying that it's important for us to get to know each other. And as we get to this idea of the conflict, I'll just look at this idea that if we establish ground rules for how we will behave, we provide a safe environment, provide a certain amount of structure, and we're also setting up an expectation in the students that a certain amount of conflict is not unexpected. In fact, it's potentially a healthy thing so long as we don't let it get out of hand. So what are some of the ways that we might do that? Well, of course, ground rules can be established pretty simply as part of the environment in our classes. And it does say something about the instructor probably needing to monitor how things are going, especially in the beginning, just to make sure that we're staying within the bounds of our interaction.